A Tibetan Book of Spells. By Sam van Schaik. Abstract, magical practices, such as bringing rain, repelling hail, and summoning and dispelling demons, are an important part of both Bonpo and Buddhist practice in Tibet and the Himalayan region. This chapter explores the connections between a 10th century book of magic preserved among the Dunhuang cave manuscripts and anthropological observations of magical practices recorded in the late 20th century. Taking some key examples from the Dunhuang manuscript, I explore how certain key points of similarity show a continuity with the repertoire of a Buddhist ritual practitioner, or a Bonpo, or in practices that cannot be easily assimilated to either tradition. I argue that it is important to point out such correspondences, even when they occur over nearly a millennium, and when the mechanism of their transmission is, as yet, unclear. Introduction. Specialists in healing, divination and the propitiation of spirits are found in both the Buddhist and Bonpo traditions of Tibet. These specialists may be monastics or lay practitioners, and their specific association with Bonpo or Buddhist schools is perhaps less important than the repertoire of ritual services that they provide. Many of the rituals are shared across traditions, and are found in variant forms widely dispersed across the Tibetan cultural area. And though changed in the process of transmission over the centuries, they also date back to the early development of Tibetan Buddhism. Some years ago, I published 2 brief notes on my website earlytibet.com. In the first, A Tibetan Book of Spells, February 2009, I introduced a Tibetan booklet from Dunhuang offering methods for divination, rainmaking, and curing various medical ailments. In the second, I looked at a single ritual from this book of spells, and pointed out several similarities with the ritual observed by Charles Ramble in Nepal. Though aimed, I would like to thank those who contributed to the discussion of this material in the comments fields, especially Dan Martin and Peter16. Sam van Schaik. At different ends, both rituals involve molding an effigy of a frog, filling it with various ingredients, and at the end of the ritual, placing it next to a spring. Since then, I have noted several other points where the rituals outlined in this book of spells at the British Library are strikingly similar to rituals observed by anthropologists in the late 20th and early 21st century. Although I originally felt that the great distance in space and time between the Dunhuang booklet and the records of modern practices meant that these observations could only remain curiosities, I now think that it is worth exploring them a little further. There has not been much work on this kind of ritual manual in the recent history of Tibet. As Nicola Seidel has pointed out, studies of local ritual practices in the Tibetan cultural sphere have generally relied on observation and description, with much less attention to any textual basis for these practices. Often the texts have been regarded as exogenous or detached from local practice. While collections of texts for this kind of practice do exist, they have attracted little interest from scholars. As the examples that follow show, a particular ritual from This Dunhuang book of spells may find a later echo in the work of a Buddhist ritual practitioner, or a Bonpo, or in practices that cannot be easily assimilated to either tradition. The value of the Dunhuang manuscripts has mainly been seen in terms of their age. Naturally enough, less interest has been shown in the fact that this manuscript cache was formed by a local community. Despite the treasure hunting that resulted in the dispersal of the manuscripts all over the world, there is an archaeological integrity to the collections, in that they have been generally kept separate from other manuscripts in the institutions in which they have ended up. Over the last 2 decades, the International Dunhuang Project has done much to bring these institutional collections together in an online resource, idp.bl.uk. We are still some way from the time when we can compare this cache with those found in monasteries and stupas elsewhere. So at this stage, a comparison between the rituals found in Dunhuang manuscripts and contemporary practices observed in communities in the Tibetan cultural sphere might offer us insights that we would not otherwise have access to. In time the picture will be Daniel Santo. More recently, I benefited from discussions of the Indic context of some of the rituals described here with Gurgly Hidas and Gethin Rees. An exception is Shen Yulin's work on the medical rituals known as GTO collected by MIFM. There are several major printed collections of minor rituals, including the Bari Bu Bum and the Los Snh Hogs Pa Itn Gags Kyi Bu Bum by MIFM. Clearer, the great gap in time will lessen as examples from the intermediate period come to light, and we will be able to make more sense of the continuities and changes in these rituals of daily life. The booklet. The manuscript of the Dunhuang spell book is a codex, formed of bifolios stitched along the middle with thread. When opened out, the bifolios are the size of a small pothe, dpe cha, leaf. The resulting long and thin folio size is unusual among the Dunhuang manuscripts. In fact, no other codex manuscripts from Dunhuang are in this format, most pages being closer to square-shaped. As Agnieszka Helman-Wasny has pointed out, there is another Tibetan manuscript in the British Library with the same format. This manuscript is probably from the 19th century. This is also a compendium of texts, based in the ritual world of the Nyingma school. Though less concerned with the quotidian aims of the texts in the Dunhuang spell book, Helman-Wasny has also studied a Tibetan-Mongolian medical manuscript that has a similar long and thin format, though in this case the binding is along the long top edge of the book. On the physical characteristics of an ore, see Helman-Wasny. Detail from the Book of Spells. As with some of the rituals in the Dunhuang spell book, we are faced with a very long period of time between the date of the Dunhuang manuscript and the later Tibetan example. Nevertheless, we can speculate that the folded pothe style of codex did occur in the intermediate period, if only because the pothe remained by far the most common format of paper folios in Tibet. The pages of the Dunhuang spell book are composed of rag paper, a type of paper resulting from the recycling of textiles, sometimes along with old paper. The Primary fiber type is Bamarianavia, Rami, and was made on a sieve, with late lines showing 4 to 5 per centimeter. This type of paper is very common among the Dunhuang Tibetan manuscripts, and indicates that the manuscript was constructed and written locally. The cover page of the Book of Spells. The cover of the book was written on in large, outline style letters. This is the Ritual Manual of Pika Prajanaprabha, Big Kru Padnaya Prabai no Pika. The term no Pika is unusual, though it does continue to be used in later Tibetan ritual literature. It appears as no Pika in Sharat Chandra Das's Tibetan English Dictionary, with the definition N of a religious service, propitiatory rite. The word seems to be derived from the Sanskrit sadhanopaika. Though the Tibetan nopaika breaks the Sanskrit word up in the wrong place, it is sadhana plus upaika. It seems to derive its meaning from the whole Sanskrit term. In his work on the Mahayana manuscripts from Dunhuang, Kenneth Eastman suggested that no pika should be translated as sadhana, noting a which glosses the term as scrub thabs. We can also point to certain other Dunhuang manuscripts, including, which are undoubtedly sadhanas and bear the title no pika. Robert Meyer and Kathy Cantwell suggest, with thanks to Matthew Kapstein, that the probable origin of no pika is a Sanskrit term sadhanapayaka. This is based on the suggestion that this is the original Sanskrit term behind the Tibetan word scrub thabs. Therefore sadhana equals scrub, while apayaka equals thabs. However, Peter Daniel Santo has pointed, in any case, this title on the front of the Dunhuang spell book seems to have been written by the owner of the manuscript, to let everyone know that it was his own no pika or ritual manual. This, and the nature of the contents of the manuscript, strongly suggest that it was used in the actual practice of the rituals it contains. The owner seems to be identified as a monk by the title Big Kru, if we are to read this as a rather mangled transliteration of Sanskrit Bhikkhu. This title is not commonly used by Tibetan monks in Dunhuang or other early sources. Intriguingly, Charles Ramble writes of a ritual specialist who lived in the village of Tankya in highland Nepal going by the title Bai Shuwa. Ramble mentions the similarity of this title to Bhikkhu, but also the Nepali word for a ritualist, Baijawa. The same words, Big Kru Padnaya Prabai no Pika, are written, in the same bold style in another manuscript, Peliot Tibetan, which is a concertina containing Vajrayana ritual texts. Here the words are not written on the silk covers, but in the middle of the manuscript, in a gap left between two texts. This manuscript appears to be in a different handwriting style from the Dunhuang spell book, and whether Prajanaprabha wrote either of them, or was only their owner, is open to question. Because Peliot Tibetan is incomplete, it is difficult to fully understand the texts it contains, but it is clear that the first text, which is on the recto of the manuscript, contains instructions for the ritual preparation of medicine, sman. Thus there is certainly a thematic overlap with the Dunhuang spell book. In any case, the assertion of ownership of not only the manuscript but the rituals it contains, i.e. no pika, is significant because we know that in other communities, a specialist may closely guard the secret of a specific ritual if it is not generally known, thereby maintaining his or her role as specialist. The rituals. I have already detailed the full contents and layout of the Dunhuang spell book in the catalog entry in Tibetan Tantric manuscripts from Dunhuang. Here, I will focus on some of the key rituals with thematic links to contemporary ritual practices in the Tibetan cultural area. Out that the titles of many tantric texts contain instances of the word satanopaika, as well as marlopaika, therefore the second part of the compound would be yopaika, not apapaika. Rituals of Baidu and Avalokitesvara. The first ritual text written the right way up on the manuscript is a series of rituals associated with the deity Baidu, written Berkur in the Tibetan. The deity is also known as the Blazing Wrathful One, Kro Bo Rme Persegs. She seems to originate in the Pura literature, see for example Matsyapura. And in Tibetan Buddhism is often paired with Tara as one of the consorts of Avalokitesvara. This is a long text, occupying 5 folios of the book. The ritual begins with the establishment of a 4-cornered mandala, each side 1 cubit, krugang, in length. The Vidyadhara consecrates the mandala with ground flowers, mentog, and places a single vajra in the middle, or if one is not available, a white wand. Dandkarpo. A drawing of the deity is to be made, and the mantra as many times as possible. Then the Vidyadhara lifts the vajra 1 cubit above the ground and recites aspiration and repentance prayers. When he praises with hymns, stad, the deity herself arrives. The text states that the physical representation of the deity and the Vidyadhara's visualization should be the same. The individual rituals, too numerous to describe individually, include the following: prophecy, subduing demons, people, and animals, bringing forth water, and manipulating the flow of water, finding treasure, curing illnesses and insanity, bringing people together and attracting others. The collection of rituals focusing on Avalokitesvara is similar to the rituals of Baidu in that one deity is propitiated for a variety of ritual outcomes. This collection is more focused than the earlier one on medical matters, and many of the rituals involve the preparation of medical ointments. As Ronit Yoeli Tlalim has pointed out, the early Tibetan medical texts found in Dunhuang stand between the categories of medicine and ritual, including treatments such as moxibustion, bloodletting, and emetics, but also ritual activities such as the construction of effigies, glud. The same can be said of the medical rituals. Here, the particular form of Avalokitesvara propitiated in these rituals can be either the 1,000-armed form, or Amagapa, both of which are found in other tantric literature in the Dunhuang manuscripts. Compendiums of brief rituals such as these bear a close resemblance to some of the canonical texts found in the Dre and Kriya Tantra sections of the Buddhist Kanjur. These include the Amagapatrayastra and Amagapasakal Paraja, and Kriya Tantra texts such as Siddhi Kavara. Further rituals include dispelling curses and other enmities, warding off various kinds of spirit, including Nodsbayan, Sktika, Dre, Bonpo, and Stagsrin, i.e. the tiger-headed Rakeza, protecting crops from insects, medical cures including diseases of the eyes, poisonous bites, burns, headaches, and fever. The association of Avalokitesvara with treatments including eye medicine has continued to the present. In other cases, the specifics of the rituals do not appear to be closely linked to Avalokitesvara. Instead, we seem to have previously existing rituals that have been adapted to a Buddhist context by association with Avalokitesvara. For example, the first ritual is to ward off the influence of the tiger-headed demon, Stagsrin. This involves burning the skull of a cat, and mixing this into pure earth, Sangma, then making the form of a cat. After invoking Avalokitesvara, the model cat is to be cut up into 108 pieces while reciting Om Hriha Hum Fat Svaha. The basic structure of this cat effigy ritual has continued through to the present day, without the specific association with Avalokitesvara, as reported by anthropologists working among the Sherpas in Nepal. Both Sherry Ortner and Robert Paul described this ritual as part of larger ceremonies including funerals and the annual Dumje festival. In these ceremonies, the lay community construct a large effigy described variously as a cat, Burmang, or a tiger, Tak, stag, made of dough with a finely sculpted clay head, and painted with black and white stripes, for which charcoal and flour are used. After several other ritual acts, including making offerings and dancing, the cat effigy is taken on the main road out of the village, and just beyond the village boundary, placed on the ground and cut to pieces by young men in ritual role of Peshangba using their swords. While Paul refers to the effigy as a cat, Ortner calls it a tiger. This may reflect the different interpretations of their informants. However, Paul writes that according to lamas, also, the cat is more correctly a tiger, the term cat being only a vulgar misconstruction. This cat/tiger multivalence is reflected in the ritual in which the cat effigy is the means for dispelling the influence of a tiger-headed demon, curing insanity. The first set of rituals in the booklet are written upside down with respect to the other texts, and may have been written last rather than first. The opening ritual is a cure for insanity. Specifically, the ritual is introduced as a cure for a severe episode in someone afflicted with severe insanity. Perhaps this description refers to some kinds of seizure. A fire is made, and a mixture of iron, gold and copper filings prepared. 4 people hold the 4 limbs of the insane person. The fire is stoked, mye boche bus, and the filings are then scattered onto the person, and into the fire, while mantras invoking the akas and rakasas are recited. This is repeated 9 times. 16. Then everyone waits through the 3 watches of the night. At the final watch, 5 fewer bus are stabbed at the 4 limbs and head of the afflicted person. Finally, the text instructs the Vidyadhara, i.e. the ritual master, to bind them with the 5 kinds of thread, subdue them by pacing along their sides, strike them with the whips of your sleeves, Fudung Ji Ilkog. Finally, the Vidyadhara visualizes himself as Vajrakrita and recites another mantra, which contains the syllables Vajrayaksha main Padmi Hum. If the insanity strikes again later, the text advises a simpler ritual, burning fragrant resin, gugul, in a fire, visualizing a deity and reciting another mantra. This ritual is similar in principle to some of the shock treatments prescribed for insanity in Indian medical texts. Throwing the metal filings would create multicolored sparks and explosive sounds, creating a dramatic effect. The text itself indicates that this ritual is dangerous, stating that it is not to be performed on infants or pregnant women. More generally, this ritual clearly belongs to the Paul, Cantwell and Meyer interpret the text as saying that the person is swung over the fire, but I am not sure this is correct. Category of Homa, Spyensregs, and as Cantwell and Meyer have pointed out, there is a connection with the Vajrakalaya ritual literature. A ritual practice with some similarities to this one is still practiced for people afflicted with seizures. Larry Peters has described the ritual carried out by a ritual practitioner Mrs. Dalkar, also known by her title of Ilamo, in which a case of seizures is addressed by using a fire altar and stabbing the feet of the patient with a furba. This practice is specifically directed towards expelling a hostile spirit, and such possession is not mentioned in the ritual perhaps surprisingly, given the use of wrathful methods, mantras, and symbolism. Moreover, the contemporary practitioner, Mrs. Dalkar, not only strikes the patient's extremities with the furba but sucks on the end of it to remove impurities, a common practice among Tibetan and Mongolian shamanic healers. Despite these differences, both rituals are applied to a patient undergoing a seizure, and both feature the use of a fire altar and the stabbing of the extremities with a furba. 3.3 Diseases caused by Nagas. Following the ritual for insanity, and still in the same body of text that is written upside down, there are 2 rituals for illnesses associated with the Nagas, Klug. The first is for men with obstructed waters, chusp gags, or women with inverted wombs, Engel log, the latter probably referring to a prolapsed uterus. The ritual involves the Vidyadhara tying knots in a thread around his waist, and handing it to the patient to hold. Compare the description of Palden Lamo by Renata Nebeski Wojciechowicz. The king of the Nagas is drawn around her waist as a girdle. Afterwards, this thread is wound around a shin bone and added to a torma, which is to be thrown into a road. The last element of the ritual, throwing of the shin bone wound with thread into a road, is also found in Tibetan rituals using a cross wound with thread, mdos. In the terms of later Bonpo medical rituals, the stick wound with thread is called Rishyang Buletin, while the cross is called Nam Mka. In such rituals, as is the case here, the mdos are added to a torma. The visualization that is to be done when the shin bone wound with thread is cast away, as Cantwell and Meyer have pointed out, also contains elements found. For the account of this ritual, see Peters. On Do see the detailed study in Nebeski Wojciechowicz, on the use of Namka and Dos in a contemporary Bonpo medical ritual. In Vajrayana rituals, the visualization is that from every single pore of one's own body, a billion wrathful deities, Krobo, emerge, to overcome all hindrances and purify the illness. The second ritual in this section is for patients with aches and swellings caused by Nagas. The Vidyadhara is to make a model of a frog out of barley flour. In a cavity in the barley frog made with a bamboo stick, an ointment is to be made and applied to the point of the ache on the body of the patient. The visualization is that Hayagriva Varana appears with an entourage of black frog emanations and destroys all illnesses. After this, the barley frog is examined for a prognosis. Lift up the frog, and if a golden liquid emerges from under it, they will definitely recover. If it is merely moist, then they will recover before too long. If there is only meat with gluey flour, they will be purified by the end of the illness. It is not necessary to do the ritual again. If there is only gluey flour, break it up and do the ritual again. After this, the frog is to be placed in front of a spring, and incense offerings made to it. A similar ritual has been described by Charles Ramble in a very different period and setting, by the lamas of Chagnam in highland Nepal. The last, and perhaps most interesting, of the rites performed by Chagnam for Te is the annual rain-making ceremony. Tantric techniques for controlling the weather are nothing unusual in the Tibetan tradition. Weather makers were even employed by the Lhasa government to ensure rain at appropriate times and to keep hail off vulnerable sites. The technique used by the senior Lama of Chagnam, however, does not belong to the usual Tibetan repertoire, but was assimilated by his grandfather, Dr. Dandi, from the outsider's religion. Phi Pai Chas, specifically, from Hinduism, he learned it, it is said, from a mendicant Indian pilgrim. The ritual is performed in the summer, with the intention of ensuring that the pastures are well watered and that the snow melt that irrigates the buckwheat crop is supplemented with rain. The procedure, briefly, is as follows. 2 hollow wax models of frogs are made. Through a hole in the back, the frogs are filled with various ingredients, including the excrement of a black dog and magical formulae written on slips of paper, and the holes are sealed with a wax lid. One of the frogs is stuffed into the mouth of one of the springs to the east of Te, and the other is burned at a 3-way crossroads. The principle of this method is apparently to pollute the subterranean serpent spirits and the sky gods, and induce them to wash away the contagion by producing water from the earth and the heavens. For the use of a doe frog in another ritual related to the Klub, see Charles Ramble's contribution in the present volume 26 Samban Schaik. Though it is impossible to trace the connection between these two rituals, separated by over 1,000 years, the similarities between them are too many to be dismissed. Further research may turn up records of such rituals in the period in between the 10th and 20th centuries. The major divination ritual in this book of spells is associated with the deity Garuda, here called Nam Kalding and Biarje Kayum. At the beginning, Garuda is visualized sitting or kneeling on a white lotus growing in a lake. He is golden in color, wearing gold earrings and bracelets, and a red girdle. His legs are black and his face is like the light of a fire, very striking in aspect, chalugs. He is to be visualized with a moon at his heart for peaceful rituals, and a sun for wrathful ones. The divination practice itself uses a mirror to invoke a vision for the purpose of divination. The ritual space is set up as a four-cornered mandala, and two mantras, one of 11 syllables and one of 6 syllables, are recited. In the preparatory practice, the Vidyadhara and the mirror are ritually cleansed, and offerings are made to the mirror. A pure, i.e. prepubescent, child is placed in front of the mirror and instructed to look into it. The Vidyadhara then questions the child, and the answers to the questions will appear clearly to the child within the mirror. The text goes on to provide variations on this relatively simple ritual, mainly replacing the mirror with another focus for the child medium. These are the surface of the Vidyadhara's thumbnail, which is coated with a lacquer, a skull cup filled with moist barley flour, a sword or white wand. What is seen in the mirror or other object is said to be anything in the 3 times, that is, from the past, present or future. The text here in the Dunhuang spell book contains the earliest surviving instructions on Tibetan prasna practice. This ritual is also discussed in Chinese Buddhist ritual literature. The Chinese term is Bo So Ni, though the name seems to originate with Prakrit, as Giacomello Orofino has shown in a detailed study of the practice. There are several references in the Kalachakra Tantra and its associated literature to pradesana, which is probably a Sanskritization of the Prakrit. See also Newman on the Chinese prasna rituals and their precedents. See Strickman. He identifies the Subhuparipch as the main scriptural. The prasna ritual, often abbreviated to PRA, and pronounced Tra, has continued to be popular through to the present. As Orofino has pointed out, this ritual practice has an equally significant presence in both Buddhist and Bonpo traditions. As appears from the Gzi Brigid, in the Phutchin Pa, the way of the Chin of prediction, the first of the 9 vehicles of Bonpo tradition, we find the term PRA used as a standard term for prognostics. In the Snang Chin Gyi Theg Pa, the way of the Chin of the visual world, the second vehicle for placating and repelling the gods and the demons, mention is made of the Praltishtsal Baimi long thabs, the method of the mirror of clear prognostics, which, if one gazes with acute concentration, allows the vision of the spirits who harm other beings. Lama Chaim Radha has discussed various applications of this ritual in 20th century Tibet, including its customary use in the identification of the rebirth of the Dalai Lamas. Lama Chaim describes how the search for the 14th Dalai Lama in 1933 involved a prajna divination at Lhamo Blamcho, a lake near Lhasa. He also describes other uses of the practice, including a woman who wanted to know how many sons would be born to her, and a lama helping a group of Tibetans fleeing the Chinese to find a path to Assam. In these accounts, as well as the traditional mirror, and the sacred lake, the use of a thumbnail painted with lacquer is mentioned. However, none of Lama Chime's examples include the use of a child medium. Rain rituals. There are two distinct rain rituals in the Dunhuang spell book, which I will deal with together here. The first rain ritual comes in the Garuda section, after the prajna divination practice. In the ritual, the Vidyadhara visualizes a water mandala as a sphere, in which the syllable Na is flanked by two Hu syllables to the left and right. The Na represents the king of the Nagas, and the two Hu syllables transform into Vajras, which come together and crush the body of the Naga king. Water then comes forth from the body of the Naga, and fills the world. Source for the prajna rituals. This text is also discussed in Orofino and Chime Radha. The divination practice, including a child medium, is still used by Taman shamans in Nepal. Oral communication from Charles Ramble. Visualizing this, the Vidyadhara recites the mantra Hu Naga Hu. This brings the rain. To stop a great rain, the visualization is of a red Hu blazing with flames that are also Hu syllables. This fire spreads and burns up the world. If the Vidyadhara can see clouds, he should visualize them being on fire as well. After this, the Vidyadhara summons and binds the Naga with madras. At the end of this ritual, the syllables Na and Hu should be written on wooden slips, Biang Bulletin, with a pen, Snugpo, and stuck in the ground as appropriate, presumably in the same arrangement as in the water mandala described above. We know that wooden sticks were used in rituals in early Tibet and Central Asia. Several of the wooden slips and four-sided sticks found at the Miran site in Central Asia, dating from the 9th century, were used for ritual purposes including funerals, propitiation of deities and divination. Point 27. At the end of this ritual, there is a further practice for to ward off hailstones, and incidents of illness, fierce harmful spirits, and other destructive entities. This involves visualing a Vajra mace, Churmakan, with an angry head, with frowning wrathful eyes, which strikes the Nagas, dragons, and demons and repels them all. The second rain ritual in the manual is more complex than the first. The Vidyadhara is instructed to set up a canopy or tent near a pool or clear spring. Inside, he creates a mandala with red ochre, chag, and draws or paints the Nagas of the four directions on cloth, RAS, or paper, shag, as follows. East, white with 5 heads. South, blue with 9 heads. West, red with 7 heads. North, green with 8 heads. Then the mandala is to be ritually cleansed, Sangspra, with the 5 precious things, 5 seeds, and 5 medicines. The top portion of the food offerings, smos, is sprinkled for the Nagas and the protectors. 4 arrows, MDA, are to be placed at the 4 corners of the mandala, and the mantra Naghdisa is to be tied to the notch of each arrow. Once this is done, the ritual is performed. The text then states that the Vidyadhara's cloak, monk's robe and crown are to be made blue. He is then to gaze towards the Mahamegha Sutra and read the text constantly, while offering the turma. The reference to making blue is difficult to interpret, but actually occurs in the Mahamegha Sutra itself: a blue canopy and blue dress, blue banner, and all the offering is to be made blue. Finally, the Nagas are summoned from the water. The Vidyadhara visualizes their presence, and rituals of offering and purification performed. The offerings are thrown into the water. Then the Vidyadhara visualizes a huge cloud coming from the mouth of the chief Naga and filling the sky, and rain pouring down, while reciting Hung Naga Hung. This is the end of the ritual, but further actions are suggested if rain does not fall. These include striking the effigies of the Nagas with a rod while reciting the Kilaya mantra, performing a fire ritual, and finally burning the effigies of the Nagas. The text concludes, if that does not suffice, then it is impossible. This ritual bears some resemblance to the one in the Mahamegha Sutra, and the presence of the sutra itself in the ritual practice shows that this is not accidental. A series of more complex rain-making rituals found in the Vajrachyasamayakal Parja also contain many similarities with the ritual here. Another similar ritual is found in a text translated into Chinese in the 6th century, which has been recently studied by Ronald Davidson. This text, Taisho, prescribes a similar setup of mandala and Naga effigies, but lacks the instructions on visualization, and is not as clearly linked to the Mahamegha Sutra. It does have similar instructions on what to do if the initial ritual is not effective. Again, the rain-making, and stopping rain and hail, rituals are the earliest surviving detailed instructions on such practices in Tibetan. Bringing rain, and even more importantly in Tibet, preventing hail, continued to be staple rituals of Buddhist and Bonpo ritual specialists through to the present day. Accounts of rainmakers working in Tibet and in exile are evidence for the continuation of many aspects of the rituals described here. For example, the Nyingma Lama Yeshe Dorje, who performed rituals for bringing rain and for stopping hail in Tibet, and then for the Dalai Lama in the Dharamsala. He describes the necessity of locating a body of water to perform the ritual, and pitching a tent next to the water in which the ritual is carried out. A study of hail prevention rituals in Northeast Skyrja in Northeast Amdo by Rdo Rajadan Grub provides some interesting points of comparison with the first ritual above, in which the prevention of hail is mentioned. In the village tradition observed by Rdo Rajadan Grub, hail prevention is a serious business, which translation in Bendel 1880. I would like to thank Gurgly Hiddas for pointing this out to me, and for sharing his pre-publication work on the Vajrachyasamayakal Parja. Is handled by members of a lineage of hail protectors, Ser Srung, who are funded by a hail prevention tax. This social situation has been described in many other settings in Tibet. While the exact nature of the ritual and implements used in Schaik differs from the ritual prescribed in the Dunhuang spell book, one of the main hail prevention rituals is said to be based on the meditation on B'arjil Kayum, almost the same name by which Garuda is called in the Dunhuang spell book, i.e. B'arj Kayum, a ritual for pregnant women. This ritual is for those who wish for a child from a childless woman, but med Buletin med pa, and for the protection of a woman's life after giving birth. The ritual is performed in a mandala delimited with knives, mchan, and 5-colored thread. On the 8th and 14th days, she should take the 8 vows of a lay devotee, dge psnyen ma. Her body is to be cleaned and she is to be dressed in new clothes, ornamented with jewelry, and taken into the center of the mandala. The Vidyadhara should place mustard seeds on top of her head, and stay until midnight reciting aspirational prayers and confession, then knot the strings 108 times. The Vidyadhara should recite the mantra and perform the mudras of the great king of the Yakas. Then he should write her name on paper and attach it to his clothes and those of the woman. If the woman comes to harm, the Vidyadhara should quickly grab a 5-pointed vajra, and make offerings and perform recitations for 7 days. A vivid visualization is described here. From the realm of the 4 great kings come many infants who have died in the womb. The Vidyadhara is to bind them and send them back. Then, fulfilling their commitments, many goddesses come from the sky to protect the womb and place a child there. Any demons are thwarted by this. Like the fruit of the ajakara, ajaka, their head bursts into 7 parts. This visualization draws on many aspects of Buddhist mythology, in particular the account of Queen Maya's conception of the Buddha, which begins with her dreaming of being taken away by the 4 great kings. The care of women in pregnancy and childbirth, and children before and after birth, are key human needs and are found across all traditions of Tibetan medical and ritual practice. In recent years, this previously neglected area has been the subject of a dedicated study by Francis Garrett and Thubton. Rdo Rajadan Grub, Sanghi and Gavin Kilty have described a variety of rituals which cover the period from early pregnancy to late childhood. The presence of this ritual is important for our understanding of the social conditions in which it was used. In particular, it confirms that this book of rituals was intended to be used by monks working with lay communities, and not only in Buddhist monastic establishments. In contemporary Tibet, a Buddhist monk is often called upon to carry out rituals during pregnancy and after the birth of a child. However, I have not seen a detailed account of the rituals performed on the behalf of a pregnant woman. An anthropological account of Tibetan customs from conception through to childhood. Brown, Farwell, and Nurangsha mention only relatively generic rituals practiced during the gestation period that do not seem to be specifically formulated for this purpose: the reading of sacred texts and giving out of blessed protective strings, the making and casting out of an effigy to counteract malign spirits, and consulting an oracle to answer questions about the unborn child. Conclusion. Is there any more we can say about the owner of the Dunhuang Book of Spells? We know that he went by the Sanskritic name Prajanaprabha. Taking into consideration the paper used in the construction of the manuscript, and the style of handwriting, it is likely that he was active in Dunhuang or one of the nearby towns at some point from the late 9th through to the mid-10th century. Despite this location being far from the center of Tibet, Prajanaprabha was working in the idiom of Tibetan Buddhist ritual practice. His use of the title bhikkhu, big crew, suggests that he was a monk, although as we have seen, the similar sounding title Vaishnawa is used by lay ritual specialists in highland Nepal. His status may have been something between monastic and lay, as is sometimes the case in smaller Buddhist communities. The ritual repertoire of this book of spells is wide-ranging, but significantly omits funerary rituals, though these are found in other Dunhuang manuscripts. In fact, what unites all of the rituals in the book is their focus on this life. They are see Garrett 2008, Sanghi and Kilty 2011. On the archaeological records of Buddhist monks carrying out rituals related to pregnancy with lay communities. This worldly rather than otherworldly. Not only funerary matters, but the soteriology of Buddhism too are absent here. This suggests that the book was written to answer the everyday this worldly needs of a community, and perhaps that its owner Prajanaprabha specialized in catering to these needs, filling a social role comparable to modern ritual specialists in the Tibetan cultural area. The above comparisons that I have made with 20th and 21st century ritual practices show that functions and many of the specific ritual forms of these practices continued to be in demand over the centuries. Yet this is only a foray into the area. These comparisons do not cover all of the anthropological literature, and even if they did, there are surely ritual practices that have not been recorded which may offer further correspondences. The modern ritual practices that I have discussed observed tend to be on the periphery of the Tibetan cultural area, such as northeast Amdo and highland Nepal, but I do not know whether any conclusion can be drawn from this other than that anthropologists have found it easier to work in these areas. A fascinating question raised by the correspondences between the Dunhuang spellbook and modern ritual practice is how these rituals have been preserved for centuries through the mechanisms of oral transmission and manuscript copying, often by individual specialists based in small communities, in the absence of major institutional support and canonical transmission. Research into the genre of minor ritual compendia, BU-BUM, such as the one compiled by Bari Lotsawa in the 12th century, will help, and the printed collections of Bonpo transmissions, as will the discovery and study of more manuscript books of spells from both Buddhist and Bonpo traditions.